Well, hello everyone, and welcome to our Kepler chat with teacher Mrs. Stacy Lung, one of our STEM teachers. We're very excited as a classical education platform to be offering and to be putting such an emphasis on STEM classes, on science courses. And Mrs. Stacy Lung is one of our teachers in that department. Welcome, Stacy.
Thank you, Jeffrey. It's good to be here.
So you're offering Ecology and the Environment as one class, Anatomy and Physiology and Wellness. Those are both for upperclassmen in high school. And then you also have a junior high logic phase class called Astronomy and Earth Sciences. So 3 science classes coming up for this coming academic year. I would love to hear a bit about your background in the sciences and about your passion for the sciences. But really, maybe we can just start with some personal background. Who are you? How has God been shaping you? Why are you here at Kepler? And so on.
All right, sounds good. Well, as you mentioned, my name is Miss Stacy Lung, and I am living in the far western part of Minnesota. So a lot of people think of the Twin Cities when we talk about Minnesota, but I actually live closer to Fargo, North Dakota, than the Twin Cities. So we get a lot of wind and cold weather here in this part of the country, even now in May. I have 5 children of my own. They range in age. My oldest is 18. He's graduating from high school this year, down to my 10-year-old. Spent some time homeschooling and teaching homeschool courses online before this. Also working on my own degree through TEDS, or Trinity Evangelical Divinity School, right now. So, and I should mention working as the director of an environmental learning center out here.
Oh yeah,
so I get to be outside quite a bit.
That's very cool. And I definitely want to tell the theme for today's talk, everyone, today's chat is going to be the environment and Christian stewardship of the environment. But so your background is in the natural sciences, geology initially.
That's right.
So how has your evolution through the several sciences, and then the degree you're getting now is certainly not in geology. So I'd love to hear maybe about some of this, how you've been evolving.
Sounds good. Yeah. Not in geology, not in the natural sciences either, the one I'm doing now. But yeah, through my early years, high school and my undergraduate degree, my passion was for the natural sciences. I did some things with chemistry, but my undergraduate degree was in geology. And from there, I did go on to teach in a traditional high school. Chemistry classes, physics, geology, some earth science classes, just kind of a variety of classes in the natural sciences. But as you mentioned, I've gone through a transition both in what I've enjoyed studying and how I think about even the natural sciences that I still love. And that started to happen when I went back for a master's degree in environmental education. So I took the environmental sciences that I was interested in, and I started to combine it with education. I went to the Concordia University that's in Wisconsin for that degree. And they just started to open my eyes to some of the other things that perhaps I had neglected in my focus on the natural sciences. And through some of those encounters, some of the mentors that I met in that program, I got involved with Trinity's doctorate program in educational studies, which is part of their social science research arm. And it just gave me a wider perspective that encompassed more than just kind of the empirical look at natural sciences. And I started to look at science as a way to explore how God is working in my life and how God is working in the lives of others, and how he kind of tells us a little story about himself when we let ourselves kind of tune into that story. And that comes from George Washington Carver. He's one of my favorite scientists because that's what he says, that God speaks to us through this radio broadcast of the world he created every hour if we tune in. And so it's been, for me, learning how to tune into that a little bit better.
Well, that makes me think of, you use the word wonder a couple of times in your teacher profile, and that your research for your PhD is focused on creating wonder. I guess I have kind of a twofold. I have a comment and a question. When I'd like you to interact with the comment, when I go to a science museum, I go to some science related event for the public, the word wonder gets bandied about so much by people who aren't Christians, and I struggle to see like how the word wonder could even come into play in a universe without God. So I wonder if you'd interact with that thought. But more than that, I'm interested in why you're motivated. I mean, you've already hinted at some of it, but why you're motivated to bring wonder to students of science.
All right. I think I'm going to start by answering that question by kind of comparing wonder, doing a little contrast between wonder and curiosity. And one of the things that I've become aware of, or that has kind of captivated my attention, is this difference between wonder and curiosity. And curiosity, often thought of as trying to investigate something to find out what caused it. And in many cases, when we're talking about science and we start to get into the applied sciences, once we understand what causes something or how something works, then we can kind of master that, and we can make something useful to control that particular thing. Where wonder isn't so much looking for a mastery of a cause. It's kind of that appreciative posture of listening and learning and maybe seeing in a new way. One of the things that I love about wonder is that a lot of the definitions indicate it's kind of this approach or appreciation for something that is other, something that we don't already understand. And that's what stops us in our tracks, right? We don't have this framework. We don't understand it right now. And so we can stop and appreciate it. And so as a Christian, when I think about wonder leaves this room for the fact that I don't have to understand everything. I don't have to have mastery of all things. There are things that God leaves. There are mysteries that God leaves in the world, I guess is a way to say it. Now we see in a mirror, but dimly. And so we have to have a place for things that transcend just this physical world. Some of the things that the natural science really privileges, there has to be room for a little bit more in our experience. And I think wonder helps give us that. And because I have an interest in the environment and ecology, God's creation is just a natural place to experience some of that wonder.
Of course. Yeah, well, it's interesting to me that, so what you're saying about wonder here, and then talking about having control or mastery of something, makes me then think about stewardship. So one of your courses here has, so it's called Ecology in the Environment. And as soon as you say ecology, you start thinking about ecological movements and the way that Christian ideas of stewardship might interact with broader ideas. Broader is a terrible expression, but with ideas in the world, inside the church and outside of it, for ecology is really interesting and often conflicted. And I think that there's a perception outside the church of what Christians believe about stewardship, but at the same time, Christians are uncertain about what stewardship, the dominion, right? The dominion mandate. What does that mean? So I wonder if you could talk about that, because wonder takes me there. How can I have wonder for God's creation if I'm also supposed to steward that? Is that something that fits?
I think so. I think it fits well. And I think I should also say that it's not curiosity or wonder, it's a both and. And I think stewardship kind of holds those two things together, because God did intend for us to till, to create, to make something. We were created in his image, and he's a creator. And so we're creators as image bearers. So he intended for us to create something with the raw materials he gave. But when he gave us that dominion or stewardship, I think also because we're image bearers, he intended us to use it the way that he uses his dominion. When he rules in love, in care, in concern, looking out for our best interests clearly, even at the expense of his own son. And so when you look at dominion in that light, I think that helps us understand how we're to be creating and having dominion. How do we care for this creation that is a gift,
right,
that he's given us?
And so, we are to be toward creation as God himself is toward his creation and toward us.
Right.
Is it overly pithy then? Because I really like how you said it, and I'm often tempted to sloganeering, but is it overly pithy to say that wonder plus curiosity equals stewardship? Maybe a little too cute, huh?
Yeah, I haven't thought a lot about it. I think that we have to be careful about the end of our curiosity and our motivations, and so and that's the same tension we have with pure science, you might say, and applied sciences.
Yes.
Why
Well,
are we? I interrupted.
Yeah, no, we interrupted each other. That's the joy of live cast.
Yep.
We actually have a course that's being offered by another teacher, Edward Straka, I believe. I'll just check very quickly. Bioethics, and that's the sort of thing where you saying we need to be careful of what the end of our curiosity is, like what the goal of the curiosity is. That's a part. That's part of that. It is in fact offered by Edward Straka, bioethics. So I think it's really I love being a part of a Christian classical education platform that is being so conscientious about bringing the sciences and the various aspects of it. I was speaking to an astronomer yesterday, Mr. Ahern, who teaches for us, and hearing him talk about a lot of these same themes. And how we handle them, and really especially how just as you were saying, it all fits together. And this temptation sometimes to separate science from everything else, or to put it over everything else, is sort of a bizarre compulsion of ours. And we could talk about the reasons for it, but really it ought to be integrated, and we have an integrated education. And so philosophy and wonder can fit in with science. But let's talk about your agenda.
Oh boy!
Yeah, how exciting! So you are concerned to bring wonder to your students, and you have this class on ecology and the environment. What do you want to bring to students in this?
So I think that there are a couple of things that are really important to me, especially in the ecology and the environment class. And I'm actually going to go back to something you said earlier about being careful not to silo things. I think that a class like ecology and the environment is a great laboratory for doing that, because ecology is by nature very interdisciplinary. You're already talking about bringing all the natural sciences in, chemistry and physics and biology and geology. So you already have this but ecology and the environment also inspires a lot of the arts, because I think it is because it's God's creation. And I'll say that, the wonder that we experience in creation causes us to create art because we want to share that wonder with someone else. And so I do like to bring in writings from some of the environmental writings are very well done, very creative. There's some really interesting things that we can bring into the classroom from the arts, from literature. Aldo Leopold is one of my favorites. If anybody is looking for something to do during the quarantine, his Sand County Almanac gets a strong recommendation from me.
Okay.
But it allows us to do that, I think, in a really unique way, to bring all of those things together.
Tell me about the environmental center that you're involved with. What does that work like?
So it is actually a Christian environmental learning center. And that one of the things that we're exploring is, how do we steward well? And so it's not just leaving everything natural as is, although there is an aspect. We've restored a we have a prairie restoration on site. It'll never be quite like a native prairie. We can never get that kind of biodiversity artificially. But we've done some prairie restoration, but at the same time, we are doing some organic gardening. We have some animals, including horses, on the site. So we're actually trying to do some experimenting with, how do we do this well? What could this look like? Where we're both cultivating and creating, and also restoring and protecting and conserving.
Yeah, so restoring, protecting, conserving. What makes us different from a gardening club?
what makes the Environmental Learning Center different from a
Yeah, so
gardening club?
and the mission of the gardening of the
Yeah,
learning center.
right. So we do have areas that, for example, like I mentioned, the prairie, where we are trying to restore something to a state of biodiversity or a state of, I hate to say natural, because ecosystems are always changing. There is no such thing as what is the ideal or what should be or what always was. It's, ecosystems change over time. And that's one of the brilliant things about the way God designed it. There's so much resilience and there's so much adaptability within the system. But we do have areas where we're trying to provide a look at what it can be.
Yeah.
And maybe what it was, or closer to what it was historically. When we do things like garden, we try to be very careful about what we're using. If we are going to enhance the soil, how are we doing that? Are we composting with materials from programs? Are we careful about our food waste? Are we careful about what things we use on site and how they were manufactured and developed and produced? So I think there is just sort of this conscientious look at, like I said before, how do we love this little corner
Yes.
that we've been allowed to steward, that God's given us to steward? How do we love it? We can't do it like God, because we are still human and fallen and all of those things. But how do we?
But God wants us to try to be like God,
right,
and to create this beauty and look after things. And I love your use of the word conscientious, right? Because it really, in every aspect of our lives, and we'll be more passionate about some things than others, and that's natural and good. But in every aspect of our lives, we ought to be self-conscious in the positive way, like aware of what we're doing and why we're doing it. And it doesn't have to be a big deal. Like what we eat, how we interact with other people, our relationships with our spouses, everything. We ought to be self-conscious. And I love that you and this group of folks are being conscientious about this particular aspect of life. So I posted the link, guys, in the chat to the Christ Serve Ranch.
That's correct.
Is that so I say it? Okay, yeah. So I encourage you guys to check that out. I think it's a very, very cool thing. But you also have a course on anatomy.
Yes.
And I wonder if you could talk to us a little bit about the purpose of that course and where you're going with that.
Yeah. So anatomy, physiology, and wellness, it will be based in looking at scientific explanations, scientific background. It's really a human biology class. So, what makes us human? How many muscles do we have? What does the skeletal system do for us? It is that traditional anatomy and physiology class. But along with this, I also want to think about beyond that, we're more than the muscles in our body. We're more than the bones. We're more than the organ systems that make us up. Why did God design us the way that he did? And how do we care for and steward, just like we steward that little corner of creation, how can we care for and steward the miracle of our bodies and that God created us to have? And so when we talk about muscles, what does it mean to take care of our muscular system, and sharing ideas and plans and goals with each other? Go ahead.
So much of what we do, at Kepler and in classical education is about integration. And so you're approaching anatomy and human anatomy in an integrated whole life sort of way.
Yep. And I think I would mention too, because you mentioned the bioethics class, in all of these classes, not the two upper level classes will have opportunities to engage with ethical issues, anatomy, physiology, and wellness, as well as ecology and the environment.
Very cool. Okay. And so this is the course that has the cow eye kit, right?
Yes.
Yeah, we were talking about that in so there's a little Slack group for teachers, and there's a Slack group at Kepler for all the administrative staff, and we were talking about how exciting it is that there's a class with a cow eye dissection kit. Can you talk about that and tell some maybe some prospective students about that?
Sure. Well, So cow eyes are incredibly interesting to dissect. We can just start with that. And it's a great example of how well God designed our systems. And it also, because there's a lot of correlation between a cow eye and a human eye, we can even learn a lot about how our eye is designed by exploring this cow eye. Cow eyes are also relatively easy to get a hold of in most places, which may surprise people, but your local butcher, if you have a meat market in town, they probably have a few on hand because they don't get rid of them as easily as some other cuts of meat.
I imagine. So viewers are encouraged to go grab a cow eye for themselves.
Well, if they don't want to order it through a company, you can you can access them fairly easily. But the seeing eye is one of the most incredible designs in God's creation. And so it gives us a good entryway into that. We can dissect animals and some other things, but because this is more of a human biology class, that's one dissection that gives us a strong correlation from an animal to a human.
Yeah, that's cool. Daniel Fukushan is very excited about the tip to go buy an eyeball, and he's the kind of person who is really into different cuts of meat and unusual cuts of meat. So I could see him actually doing this.
And you have to understand, I live in a very agricultural area of the country, so perhaps it's easier for me to get a hold of than some. But
so you have as required materials in this course 3 kits: blood typing kit, a glow germs kit, and a cow's eye dissection kit. So these kits are available for purchase. But it's very interesting to me that you've made it one of the materials for this course, because there are different ways. So parents who are watching this, this class meets lab requirements, right? Yes. So now there are in most places, having a lab in which the teacher does the work in online education, and then the students are interacting with that in one way or another, but really through a screen, that is a viable option for meeting requirements. But you are actually asking the students to go buy a kit themselves. So how is that going to go down? Have you done this before in online classes?
I have.
Okay. All right. So I'd love to hear how that works.
Yeah, and actually at one point we were actually packaging the lab kits for science classes and mailing them to students. But then what we found is if something happened with the mail, students didn't have supplies in time, and it was easier for the most part, it became easier for parents and students to order directly from, in this case, it's Homeschool Science Supply Company or Carolina. There's a couple of places where you can, then it's shipped directly to you without the middle step. But when you do something hands-on, it's that embodied sensation. It kind of goes back to what we've been talking about all along. We're whole people. And so if I just talk at you and tell you something, I might be able to engage your brain. But when you actually get to touch the cow eye, when you see the optic nerve yourself, you're going to experience that in a very different way. And you're going to create a memory. You're going to, the information that we talk about when that cow eye is in front of you is going to be much stickier than if I did it on a camera and just showed it to you.
And I love the double meaning there, is stickier, right? So potentially your gloved hands will be getting sticky, but it'll stick in your brain too.
Yeah.
And actually, I homeschooled. I'm 42 years old. I graduated as a homeschooler in the 90s. It was more pioneering days of homeschooling, you could say. But I've never dissected anything, and I didn't get to do that aspect of a high school education. And I think it's pretty nifty that your course kind of brings up. Well, homeschoolers have that opportunity. They don't have to take your class to dissect an eyeball, but it's a very, very cool offering you have there. And still obsessed about eyeballs, and I'm sorry about that, Stacy. But Daniel wants to know if students can do a deer eye.
Well, I come from a house full of hunters too. The cow eye is probably going to be a little bit easier.
Yeah, it'll come with the whole kit and everything, right?
But coming from a family that also hunts, you learn a lot from taking care of your own.
Yeah, I imagine. Yeah, for sure. Well, that's very cool. Now you also have, so you're offering 3 classes. There is a middle school logic phase, so grade 7 through 9, offering as well astronomy and earth sciences. Could you talk about that course a little?
Sure. So this course actually goes right back to the beginning for me. The very first class I taught out of my undergraduate education was astronomy and the earth sciences, and it was an 8th grade class in a traditional high school. And I think I've been teaching some version of astronomy and earth sciences for, well, I'm not going to tell you how many years, but
Okay,
a
fair enough.
long
A
time.
long time. Okay.
A very long time. And so this is the class that is my heart. Like I said, I have an undergraduate degree in geology, and it's just an area that that has always been, going back even when I was a child. Like, my dad had this elaborate rock collection, and so as a kid I started collecting rocks and trying to understand what story those rocks told. I hate to admit this, my husband, it drives him crazy, but we actually have an old dresser in our house, and it's full of rocks, and every drawer we've got, the minerals are in the drawers, and then there's the sedimentary rock shelf and the igneous rock shelf and the metamorphic rock shelf. And every time we go somewhere, he says, "You don't need any more rocks."
I have a geologist in the family as well.
Oh, so
And,
you understand.
yes.
Um,
Well, that's very cool. Talking about integration, and whole beings. I note here that you have, so you have some technical reading. You have some technical texts: Stargazer's Guide to the Night Sky, The Practical Geologist. You also have Out of the Silent Planet by C.S. Lewis. What is that doing in there?
Well, and again, this kind of goes back to what I was talking about with the environment. God's creation inspires some of the greatest works of our own creation and our own culture making. And so looking at something that's been inspired by astronomy, by the earth sciences, that's written by one of the great minds, I think it helps us create. It gives us a model for our own creating. And so I think that's what we miss if we look at natural sciences just with the technical text, because once we understand what story that rock is telling, then maybe we can be the voice to tell that rock. And the Bible tells us, right? The rocks cry out. They are giving glory to God. They are telling a story about his creation. And so if we can understand and start to listen to that story, maybe we can tell our own stories.
Yes.
And so I guess I hope that it inspires. I also teach an undergraduate science class at Trinity International University as an adjunct, and it's for non-science majors. And it's so sad when students come in and think, I'm not good at science. I'm more creative. I'm more artistic. I'm not good at science. And science is incredibly creative and imaginative. Einstein didn't come up with the theory of relativity without any kind of imaginative leap there. And so maybe that's one of my own personal missions, is that students that don't come out of this thinking, I'm not good at science because I'm artistic or creative. If you're artistic or creative, you are part of telling that story.
Oh,
as much as any, it's just important that we don't leave people with that impression, I think.
And you talk about listening to or seeing creation, and then responding to that with creativity. There's so many ways to listen and so many things to listen to. But I mean, like right now in my house, so my wife is a painter, an artist. Sometimes when I say she's a painter, people ask about the kinds of houses she paints. But she's an artist. Someone sent her a bouquet of flowers recently, and so that's on a table in my room, and she's painting it. She's come up with several little paintings that she's doing with these flowers. But she doesn't have to be given flowers that happen. When we go for walks, she's constantly going. I'm on the sidewalk, just going for a nice walk, and then I keep losing her because she goes off into the bushes and grabs pine cones and kicks at the dirt to see what's under it, and this is what's inspiring her to create these paintings. And there's so whatever kind of creative you are, whether you enjoy painting or you enjoy tinkering with cars or whatever it is, there's a way that ought to be connected to creation. That has to be connected to God's creation. So I love that your class is showing a way to do that and showing how it has happened with others. That's very, very, very cool.
Thank you.
So right now, guys, I do have a question I want to ask Stacy here to kind of close out our time together. But it would be a great moment for you all if you have questions. So what you guys have here before you is an experienced online science teacher, and I know that you homeschooling families, often the sciences are one of the challenges that you see, especially when you come into high school. How are we going to tackle these things? So you have a resource right in front of you, and you're very welcome to post comments and questions, and we'll engage with them as they come in. Well, while that happens, Stacy, I'd like to ask you, maybe, so as we were off camera before we went live, we were talking a little bit about your walk with Christ and how your approach to the sciences has also shifted as that has happened. I'd love to just hear a little bit about that.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I think I mentioned even earlier in this this conversation that my love for science started very young. And so through high school, through my undergraduate years, that was where a lot of my focus, a lot of my efforts were centered. But when it came to, I was raised in a Lutheran family. We went to church every Sunday. I sat with my grandparents in the old Lutheran church in the country every Sunday. But what we were talking about earlier was that for me, it was very much a siloed experience. And I guess I had a sense fairly early on that what I heard in church and what I heard in my science class, there seemed to be some dissonance there for me personally, at least at that age and at that time. And so as I got older, because faith was largely a siloed thing in my childhood, I sort of lost that connection. I went all in with the natural sciences, and my faith walk included a period where I would still go to church when I came home to visit my parents, but I think what I said to you was, for me, it was very much a mind thing that didn't go to my heart. It didn't impact my entire life, my whole self. But God didn't leave me there. And some of us, I think some of us it's easier, but some of us it takes a couple of 2x4s over the head to get our attention. In my case, there were a few 2x4s, and those are probably stories for a different time. But they were pretty powerful and impactful stories. And actually, I would say that they actually struck right at the heart of science can't fix things for you. And some of them had to do with just when I was having one of my children, the doctors told me that we were both going to die if I didn't terminate the pregnancy. I chose not to, and today that child is 17 years old and 6'5". So there's that. It was the doctors didn't have all the answers, and so it kind of went right to the heart of what I had put my faith in. And he said, "Don't put your faith in that. Put your faith in me." And that's kind of the point at which the faith that I grew up with was pretty important, because it all came back. But now it was a faith that connected the heart and the head and the whole package. And that kind of is what drove me to go into the environmental sciences at Concordia, which is a Christian university, to try to figure out, now, what does this look like?
And I love the thought, because it really is just you didn't dive into the stories, but it really is, as Daniel comments here, a beautiful testimony. And I love the thought that someone with a story like that would be my child's science teacher. Someone who the wonder is hard won, right? It's something that, maybe that is the best way to put it. But then so to have my kids under someone like that who knows the value of wonder and looking at creation that way, it's really encouraging for me. So I hope that your class fills up with many joyful students who are able to be enriched by your class. I'm really grateful you were able to stop in today and that we could talk about this.
Well, thank you. It's been a joy. Yeah, and I look forward to seeing all of you this next school year for a a wonderful year.
There you go. Perfect. Well, feel free to hang on the line as we say goodbye to folks, and we can chat a little bit after the stream. But thanks everybody for participating, for watching, and thank you, Stacy.
Yeah, thank you.